Great, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
We are here in Senate Institution on January 22nd. And I am Wendy Harrison, the chair of this committee. And sure, one of these, we have the state treasurer here to discuss how the state does bonding, particularly capital bonding. And let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves. And then
Senator Rob Dingell from Essex.
Senator Joe Major from Windsor.
And Senator Rob Plunkett. Senator Sam Harris from Orleans.
Perfect, thank you. And
Linda Moon, committee assistant.
all right, so we will just get going. We talked a little bit about this, but three of the members are brand new, and I look forward to
Great.
hearing what you have to share.
Yeah, for sure. So, Mike Pichek, State Treasurer. I'm joined by Scott Baker from our Treasury Operations team, and Ashley Doyon, who's our Director of Policy, who will you'll be hearing from in a minute and can walk more through the presentation that we just handed out. But thought maybe just be helpful to provide an overview before Scott and Ashley talk about the process of sort of the high wave tops of our bonding process and sort of why we do it, and sort of strategically what you think about when you're doing bonding and what sort of issues are on our horizon. But you know, the state, I just will bring it back to a personal level. Like, you know, you can think about bonding as you going out and making in your personal life a significant purchase that will significant assets purchase that will be around for a long time. So when you buy your home, you put it on a mortgage. When the state of Vermont builds a new prison or builds a new bridge or builds something that has a useful life of, 20, 30, 40 years, traditionally, we've made a decision that we'll bond for that instead of pay for the total cost up front. Your own personal finances are very well may be that you don't have the cash to pay for the entire house up front. So you have to get a mortgage. And in that instance, it makes sense. The asset's going to appreciate, it's going to be there for a long time. And a mortgage makes sense. If you're going to purchase a car and you're going to put a 30-year mortgage on it, obviously, it wouldn't make sense because that's going to be a depreciating asset that is going to run out of a useful life way earlier than the financial instrument that you put on it. So just in terms of like what you think about when bonding, you're not going to want to bond for IT projects that have short useful life. You're not going to want to bond for other things the state government does that has a short useful life. You want to think about things that have a longer term useful life that will be around for decades and decades. So it matches up with the debt that you're taking out. Generally in Vermont, we have issued 20-year bonds. The bonds are not redeemable or callable till 10 years. So they're out in the marketplace for those first 10 years of issuance as a guarantee. Currently, we have about $600 million that's outstanding from the state of Vermont. We have a process to make a determination about how much bonding capacity there is every 2 years. That's called the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, CDAC. CDAC is made up of representatives from the governor's team, from our team, from Joint Fiscal, and we come up with an analysis comparing Vermont to all the other states from different levels of financial metrics and saying, based on AAA states, how much debt can Vermont issue in the next 2 years? Generally, that recommendation has been coming down over the last decade, so we've been issuing less debt. Eventually, that $600 million number, if we continue on that same trajectory, will start to come down. This year, the CDAC recommendation is $100 million for the 2 years of the biennium, so $50 million for each year. We did make note this year, like we did in the last full report, that we would take a look at the recommendation in the interim biennium year and maybe make a change for that second year, partly because one of the reasons that we went with the 100 million is the amount of authorized but unissued debt the state has, the amount of federal funds that the state still has control over. So there are a lot of capital projects that are out there. We don't, we think there's limited sort of capacity to get all those projects out, is what we hear. If that changes in the next biennium or before the last year of the biennium, then I think maybe our recommendation might need to change as a result. But generally, our office issues debt once a year. We are AA plus rated from the rating agencies, highest rating in New England. We also, in the most recent issuance, got a very similar rate to AAA rated states. So the rate from the marketplace was very high. You know, they were considering us a AAA state, even though we're AA plus. And that AA plus is a rating that comes from the rating agencies. There are three rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. They all look at Vermont's basically ability to repay the debt that we're taking out. So they look at a bunch of different metrics. The metrics that we constantly are judged on that we need to improve are outstanding pension liabilities and our demographics. So with the pension liabilities, they worry if those become such a significant portion of your budget, you won't have any extra money to pay back your bonds that you're issuing. That's sort of the concern there. And just to give you a sense of the scale, I said $600 million of debt outstanding from the state of Vermont. The pension liabilities are in the billions. Now, there's a lot of good work that's been done on the pensions. They're moving in the right direction over the last 4 years. But if you think about bonding as being a source of debt, the pensions are actually much more significant at this point in terms of the outstanding liabilities. So that's something the rating agencies care about. They've recognized that we've made progress, which is great, and they want to continue to see that. And then demographics is the other one. So their concern there is that our workforce would be getting smaller, our economy would be stagnant or not growing, but maybe even shrinking, that we would have less revenues coming into the state of Vermont. And again, we'd be in an environment where we have not enough revenue to pay for all the things we need to pay for. And maybe that would put our ability to repay the debt at issue. So those are the two things that we've heard for a while. Again, on demographics, they recognize there's been some progress as well. One of the reasons why we continue to advocate, or I continue to advocate in our office for more housing, I think that's critical for our future economic success, and certainly critical to be changing those demographic numbers that the rating agencies point out and call out. On the good side of the ledger, they always appreciate our governance in the state of Vermont, our ability for legislature, governor, to pass a balanced budget, good fiscal management practices that are in place at the Department of Finance and at the Treasurer's Office. So that's something that they do care quite a bit about, and we continue to rank really well from the rating agency perspective. So every time we issue debt, we get a new rating from those rating agencies. It's a months-long process to prepare the documentation and do all the process to get the bonds out the door. There's not necessarily a set time that we issued the debt, but I think last year was June and the year before was September, if I remember correctly. So, it sort of depends on the market, depends on the need to issue the debt as well. I mentioned one thing I do want to mention is important. I think I mentioned how the CDAC recommendation has been going down. So we've been making this recommendation that less debt be issued over time. And I should also just mention with the CDAC, this is an advisory committee. Legislature and governor have the authority to do what you all want to do, but it was created about 1989, and the recommendation has been followed every year. The rating agencies really care that there's this process in place that sort of is thoughtful about how much debt the state can take out and has the ability to repay. So it's something that we get a lot of kudos for in terms of that corporate or that sort of state governance piece that I mentioned, which is important. But if we're doing less bonding, then, an obvious question is, how are we going to pay for all the capital projects that we have and the needs that we have? And one of the things that my predecessor, Beth Pierce, fought really hard to establish was a cash fund, so that there's also money available now to pay for things up front instead of bonding for them. So I mentioned the example earlier of buying a house. If you don't have the money to buy a house outright, you have to get a mortgage. Maybe there's other reasons to get a mortgage. But if you did have the cash to buy the house outright, is that a financial decision that you want to make? Well, at least you have maybe the flexibility to decide whether you want to do that or not. So Vermont has established a cash fund. There's funds in there. And the idea would be, if you're going to curtail your bonding over time, then you need to have another source of funds to be paying for capital improvement projects. So other states have done this. I think it's important for Vermont to continue to invest in a cash fund and continue to think about that as sort of a partner with bonding. Most importantly, from my perspective, because other states are doing it. So if we're measuring ourselves to other states, and other states are moving more toward cash and away from bonding, if we don't do the same, we don't have to keep the same pace as them, but if we don't do the same, then we're going to be the ones that are the outliers over time. So I do think long term, it's an important thing for us to continue to, continue to invest in. So maybe Chair Harrison, I'll leave it there just to give folks time for
Sure.
questions of me if they have them before
Perfect.
we go through the presentation.
Do we have questions? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Has the, in a short amount of time, have we seen an impact of the cash fund as far as on the total debt of the 100 million? Because I think it was going to help drive down some of that debt a little bit, but we haven't been doing it very long. Have you seen?
Yeah,
Have we seen
yeah.
a difference?
Not yet. I think it's too early, to your point. But you know, it is something I think after it's in place for, you know, a few years, 5 years, you start to say, okay, this is the amount of debt we didn't have to issue because of the cash fund. This is the interest that we didn't have to pay because of it. Right now, we're in this odd environment where interest rates are really high.
Yeah.
So we have been, you know, we were given an appropriation 4 years ago to buy down $20 million of state bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't done that yet because every year, you know, the lifetime savings, if you have just $1 million of that and you buy down $1 million of bonds, the lifetime savings would be about $50,000.
Yeah.
But every year we've been holding that cash, we've been earning annually about $50,000. So
Okay.
the market will change, interest rate environment will change, but those are some of the considerations that you have to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a follow-up on that question.
Yeah,
When the cash fund, and the cash fund does earn interest, is that interest, allocated to the cash fund?
so we generally anything that would earn interest sort of goes to the earned interest category that goes to the general fund.
Okay,
So it could be
so,
dedicated toward it, but I don't think it stays in there automatically.
Yeah, it's not like it's segregated.
Yeah.
okay. Is it
But
good?
but it is a source of revenue.
Right.
And of course, the environment will change, interest rates won't be quite where they are likely in the future, so.
Other questions?
Go ahead.
You had mentioned that, right now we do a blended cash and bond, but some states are moving strictly towards cash.
Yeah, there's some states that don't have bond, they don't do any bonding.
Would we want to stay in the blended? What is our goal
Yeah.
ultimately, to go strictly cash or just stay blended?
So I think, you know, I think it's blended. I think it's sort of thinking about having the flexibility to decide, is this something we want to use cash on now and maybe save some interest, or is it something that's a long-term investment and interest rates are really low and we want to actually sort of load up on the bonding because interest rates are so low. So I think it's good to continue to maintain both as sort of robust ways of making capital investments. But again, you want the flexibility, at least having a choice to decide, you know, do you want it to be an upfront cash purchase or, you know, put it into the bonding process?
Thank you.
Other questions?
All of that without
Oh.
notes.
Sorry, I just,
I said all that without notes.
right, oh no, he's good. So, I just want to make a comment and, just let me know
Yeah,
your opinion, but, especially in municipal situations, but also in a state, because the users of the facility, if it's a long-term facility, the users of today are not going to be the users of tomorrow. And if we bond it, then the folks who are going to use the facility in 50 years, 30 years, 20 years, they will pay some also. I mean, that's one of the rationale
yeah, in terms of,
for, doing bonding.
Yes.
That it's for,
So-
which is different than a car,
yeah,
of one household.
sort of a generationally shared expense.
Exactly.
Is there a lot of money on the bond banks right now? I mean, is there a lot of money out there that they're looking to get out there? Is it favorable to bond right now?
I mean, I thought we had pretty competitive interest rate when we issued. Scott can give the exact number. I want to say it was like 3.5.
3.5%, yeah, 20-year bonds.
So like maybe a decade ago, that was more like 1.7 or something, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, even a couple of years ago, the 21 issue was 1.43%. Very cheap, but even, I mean, that was like a historical low,
Yeah.
but still, usually 2.25% is kind of been the norm for the last 10 years, maybe, so.
So I think 3.5 is certainly good in the market relative to what other types of financing that are available, but it's higher than it historically has been.
So
So,
that could drop by a point, and then, yeah.
yeah,
It would make a huge difference if you had decided at the second year of the biennium that it was time to add some more money to it. It'd make a heck of a difference.
yeah, right, exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And plus the capital needs too, like
Right.
what's the sort of that part of the story?
Yep.
Right, which gets back to housing too. Because there are capital needs that will benefit housing production.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Thank you very much. for
yeah, no,
being
thank
here.
you all. Look
Appreciate
forward to
it.
back to committee soon. And I'll turn over to Scott. Yeah, great.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good to see you.
You as well.
Yeah.
Session.
Scott Baker, I'm Director of Debt Management and Financial Reporting at the Treasurer's Office. So Mike did a pretty good overview of everything, but this is just kind of drilling down to a little bit more. Basically talking about the bonding capacity and the how they get to the debt affordability number. So first slide, Mike mentioned CDAC, what they do. So the CDAC, the committee is made up of the state treasurer, secretary of administration, a representative from the Vermont Bond Bank, who's the executive director, two governor appointees, the treasurer's appointee, and there are two non-voting members, the state auditor and the legislative economist, who JFO can designate somebody, but or the legislative economist, that's who it is. So there are a number of states that do debt affordability studies. That chart shows, you know, different colors. These are the kind of, those are the states that do it. Vermont has looked at the last couple of years, they've spent some time, CDAC has looked at some of the other states and what they do, their best practices or whatever. So they've spent a fair amount of time doing that. But to go through the debt affordability study, we'll talk about the metrics that they use. But as Mike mentioned, the rating agencies really give a lot of credit to the, you know, that we go through this process. So the committee, CDAC, was created in 1989, and their purpose is to review the affordability of Vermont's net tax supported debt, look at, you know, the amount of debt outstanding, other obligations, and they submit a report by September 30th to the legislature and to the governor. This is the report. This is on our website. So even though they do a report every year, they come up with a 2-year recommendation, starting in 2012-13 biennium. They switched to a 2-year recommendations. They also look at the criteria used by the bond rating agencies, and some of their contingent liabilities, with moral obligations that we'll explain a little bit later. So there are 3 primary rating agencies, and they assign credit ratings to each state, basically kind of like a credit score for you know, in your personal life. The highest rating is AAA. The Vermont is AA plus with S&P and Fitch, and AA1 with Moody's. They're the same thing, just a little different term. But because Vermont was a AAA rated state up until with Moody's and Fitch up until 2018. And we lost the AAA rating based on mostly the demographics, the aging population that Mike mentioned, and the long-term liabilities, the unfunded pension and OPEB obligations. Being a AAA rated state, you're going to get the lowest borrowing costs, highest credit. So when CDAC looks at their debt affordability and their metrics, they benchmark to the AAA rated states. And this chart shows all the states with at least 2 AAA ratings. So there's 17 states that currently that have at least 2 AAA ratings. One of the metrics that's been used is debt per capita. And this chart shows Vermont's debt per capita compared to those other AAA rated states. You can see we're like 6th highest debt per capita among those. You know, we're not in a great position there because we are a small state. The population's pretty small. I think we're the 2nd smallest state population wise. So although this is a metric that that CDAC looks at, it's not the one they focus on the most because of that. They're a small state. And the rating agencies do look at it as well, but again, that's not the most important one that we look at. The next chart shows where we rank among the 50 states in debt per capita. The blue line is the median of the 50 states. The green line is where Vermont is. You can see for quite a while, we were, well under the median of the 50 states. We kind of around 2015, 16, we kind of evened out with them. And right now we're pretty much right in the median of where we are with the 50 states. The second debt metric that CDAC looks at and traditionally has looked at is debt as a percentage of personal income. What that kind of tells you is based on personal income, basically the taxpayer's ability to pay the state's debt. And again, we're among the AAA states, we're seventh. We're not quite in the middle, a little bit higher than normal. But Vermont has a pretty high personal income among the states, so we do fairly well there. The next chart shows where we are compared to the 50 states, and again we're kind of right about the median. We're just slightly below the median, 2%. We're at 1.9. You see, we as other states have lowered their debt, we've kind of caught up with them. We were well below them for a while there. But again, the numbers haven't changed. It's just that other states have kind of lowered their debt. We've been fairly steady. The next chart just shows the ranking among those. And as we mentioned, we're kind of right in the middle of those. This shows we're 25th among the 50 states in debt per capita, in debt as a percent of personal income. The higher numbers are better. So you can see 10 years ago, as shown in the previous charts, we were ranked much better. We've kind of come down as other states have lowered the amount of debt, moving more to cash, that type of thing. But we're still kind of right in the middle of 50 states. The third debt metrics that pretty much pay attention to, Vermont measures tracks debt as a percent of revenue. The rating agency report shows as a percent of gross state product. Pretty much the same thing. You won't see Vermont in this chart because again, we show it as percent of revenue. Vermont would be 3.7%, so you can see where we'd be in there. Again, revenue and gross state product is pretty much the same thing. But this is an indication of the state's ability to pay the debt rather than personal income is kind of on the taxpayer side. So those are the three primary debt metrics that they look at. The next chart shows, talked about Vermont's ratings. Again, you can see we're AA+, AA+, AA1, which is second highest rating among the three rating agencies. Although the rating agencies, all of them have slightly different methodologies, they all pretty much focus on kind of the main key indicators are the economy, financial performance, governance, and long-term liabilities, meaning pension and OPEB, and debt.
Does everyone know what OPEB is?
Yeah, so OPEB is other post-employment benefits, where the pension side, OPEB is the healthcare side, the retirement healthcare. Consider
Thank you.
that. As Mike mentioned, we did a bond issue in June. And each time we go out to do an issue, we meet with the rating agencies, talk about it, go through basically the financial performance of the state and the budget and all that kind of stuff, and then issue a credit rating. In June, we were all three rating agencies affirmed our rating with a stable outlook. The next chart, oh, yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes,
How long of a process is that as far as going out to bond and then telling you and all of that? Is there negotiations in that? Can you plead your case a little bit or
Yeah.
they see it all already?
They do, so this is the last bond issue that we did, so this is our operating statement, there's a good amount of work that goes into it. Part of this is the act first, so it takes up a lot of room, but, so as part of the process, we, work with our bond counsel, financial advisors, finance and management, basically put together this operating statement. We send this to the rating agencies and we meet with each of them separately for about a 2-hour meeting. The governor's there and the finance commissioner, and the state economist and the treasurer's office. And we basically talk about the deal, but more broadly talk about our financial performance and the budget, the economy, just everything that's going on with the state, and have a dialogue with them. So they get this ahead of time, and then we'll meet and answer any questions and, you know, do that. So they're combing through this. They're regularly, I mean, they're looking at Digger and they're following the state as well. They have, each analyst will cover a few states. So they're, you know, they keep up with what's going on in the state. So
So when you went to bond this last time, how much was that? I mean, just to give an idea of how, you know, the committee about what type of money you're talking about when you're going to bond.
okay, right. So although CDAC this year is recommending basically 50 million a year, we have a lot of authorized but unissued,
Right.
which Mike mentioned. So even though there's 50 million in this year's capital bill, when we go to bond, we will work with the departments and say, okay, what have we spent that we haven't bonded for, and what do we expect to spend in the next 12 months before we do the next issue? And that's what we will pick for a bond issue. So this bond issue, we had things from the 2018 capital bill and the 2019 capital bill, stuff, projects that were authorized, but the money hadn't been spent yet. So even though we only, you know, you authorized 50 million.
Right.
So this issue, we issued 71 million of bonds. There's a premium involved.
Right. Yeah.
So our overall rate was 3.5%. But when we go out and sell these, a lot of the buyers, the money market funds or investors, they don't want a 3% or 3.5%. They want their money market. They maybe want a 5% coupon. So instead of giving us $1 million for $1 million bond, they're going to give us $100,000 extra. So we have $100,000 premium on that piece. So we're paying a higher interest rate, but we can issue a smaller amount of bonds to get that same amount of money. So even though $71 million of bonds that we sold, we actually got $79 million of project money for it. So the $8 million, whatever that difference is, the premium, that goes into the project fund as well. So even though we're paying a higher interest rate, we're issuing lower bonds. So it's the yield that really matters. That's
Perfectly explained, because when we get the capital bill, you're gonna see that figure on there, exactly what he just said, bond premium, and that's how it gets there. So it's nice to know that without us, well, the Madam Chair and myself, will have a memory having to try to fit that out. But when you see it, you just heard it from Mr. Baker, on how that got there.
it's great. Good question, good answer.
And so, as Mike mentioned, we're also, when we do an issue, there's a 10-year lockout that we can't do anything for 10 years. So along with this 71 million of new money, we also had an issue, 36.8 million of refunding bonds. And what that is, so we sold another $36 million of bonds and called previous bonds. So it's basically like refinancing a mortgage. It's not new authority, it's just replacing old authority. And this 36 million of issue was a net present value savings of $3.7 million. So it's like refinancing your mortgage. That's why we do it. So every 10 years or whenever whenever we're going to do an issue, we look at any refunding opportunities. People can save money, 3.7 million.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
commented, no, I didn't get any.
Yeah.
And can you explain the 10 million limit? Or 10-year limit?
Oh,
did you
10-year
say?
limit. Yeah, so basically, so when we issue a bond, so they're 20-year bonds, but
Right.
they're, say we did 100 million, they're in equal and diminishing principal amounts. So there'd be 5 million maturing in year one, 5 million in year two, 5 million in year three. So even though they're 20-year bonds, if you buy some of those longer bonds, you're going to hold them for 10 years. We can't refund those for at least 10 years. So even if you're buying a 20-year bond, 10 years from now, we may refund it, but we're locked out from refunding that particular bond for 10 years.
Locked out because of that agreement, not because
Correct.
of something that the state does. Because I was gonna ask you about the 20-year limit, but that's a different question.
Yeah, the 20-year limit is in statute that we will issue 20-year bonds. And again, it's maturing every year for up through 20 years. So they're not all 20-year bonds. Some of them are 1-year bonds and 2-year bonds and 3-year bonds, but 20-year.
And you
Yeah,
try to match it to the length of the, whatever you're building, whatever the useful life of whatever's being financed.
so anything in the capital bill has to have an average useful life of 20 years or more,
Right.
And that's why the cash fund is good if they're, smaller projects that, replacing curtains or something. They'll use the cash fund for that rather than, issuing long-term bonds for that. And the 10-year is right, it's part of your indentures. We're promising the bondholders that we'll pay a lower rate because you're not going to get, these called on you in a year, so you're willing to
Okay,
take a little bit, pay a little bit more, take a little bit less interest because you're going to hold that
it's
investment.
stable.
Right.
All right, and then one more question on this vein. Do other states bond for longer periods of time?
I think there are some that could, yes. Again, it's in our statute for 20 years.
Right, and I've just been wondering why it's 20 years.
I mean, the other thing is, I don't know, how that was set. I know that when I say we, issue 20-year bonds, but they're in equal or diminishing principal amounts, that also results in, rapid amortization of the bonds. So whereas where you have a mortgage where you're paying, the same amount every month, your principal is here and your interest and your principal slowly goes up. Where we're paying the same amount of principal every year, your interest is going down. So even though our payments are going down.
Mhm.
So, basically, well, the debt is going down much quicker. It's a good thing. You're basically saving money over time.
Yeah, right.
So,
You just you're not doing as much, but
Right.
that's the balance.
right.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Okay, so next slide. So this shows the 50 state ratings, among the, Moody's, S&P and Fitch. And you can see Vermont in the green, second highest rating. You can see, it just shows where we are among the 50 states. The next rating, the next slide is kind of some comments from the rating agent, the most recent rating agents or rating reports, some of the strengths and concerns for the rating agencies. Basically, what it comes down to, some of the strengths, they cite strong financial management, liquidity and stable reserve funds, and the whole debt affordability process that CDAC goes through, and the fact that even though it's an advisory committee, that the capital bill has always reflected that the governor and the legislature have always abided by the recommendation of CDAC that has helped. And as Mike mentioned, some of the challenges, demographics, small state economy and the long-term liability burden of pensions and OPEBs. So the CDAC recommendations for this biennium, Mike mentioned some of the factors that went into it, the economic volatility, the competing capital projects, the large amount of federal funds, labor shortage, supply chain issues, high inflation, all of that went into their recommendation. So it decreased from the previous biennium. So for the 26-27 biennium, $100 million or about $50 million a year. The capital bill isn't always, exact, like $50 million each year. So, but it's 100 over the 2-year cycle. So the next chart shows the three debt metrics that we talked about: the debt per capita, debt as a percent of personal income, and debt service as a percentage of revenue. This shows where we've been over the last 10 years and the projected over the next 10 years. One of the mandates for CDAC is to do 10-year debt projections. And so you can see this first column, debt per capita. The top box shows the 10-year history. The next shows if we issued $50 million per year over the next 10 years, what would our debt per capita look like, based on future debt and what we have paying off from current debt, and compares it to the median of the AAA rated states. And you can see why it's shaded, because again, debt per capita, we suffer that we're a small state. The shading shows that we would be in compliance out of the state guideline. And that's a guideline that CDAC kind of, because they're benchmarking to AAA rated states, that's what the state guideline is, the five-year average of the AAA rated states. And the reason it's going up, they just take the current amount and project it out 2.7%, kind of an inflationary factor for the other states. And for Vermont, it's actual what it would be if we were to issue at the current $50 million per year for the next 10 years. Likewise, for the other metrics, it's just projected out the state guideline for debt as a percent of personal income. That's kind of a volatile number, but for the other AAA rated states, it's average. It goes anywhere. It's for the last 5 years, it's been 1.3 to 1.9%. It's kind of bounced around. So CDAC picked 1.8 as a state guideline. And when they do the projections, they'll look out, and the way they get to the 50 million is they say, okay, these are the debt affordability, metrics that we want to look at. And because we're benchmarking to AAA, we want to say, what level of debt can we issue, and we'll stay within these guidelines. And they'll run different scenarios, 40 million, 50 million, 60 million, and basically trying to stay within these guidelines. And for the last one, debt service as a percent of revenue, state guideline is 4%. That's actually lowered from 6% over the past several years. And due to the growth in the general fund and transportation fund revenues, they basically lowered that state debt guideline from 6 to 4% this year. I think the high point was in 2012. Vermont was at 4.7. Actually, it's even 2014 we were at 4.7. You can see now we're at 3.7. So still under the 4%. So those are the three basic debt metrics that we've talked about in the 10-year projection.
So we're good on two of them, but not the other one.
Right, and debt per capita, yeah, again, CDAC realizes we're out of the guideline, but because we're a small state, it's a little tougher. And again, the rating agencies look at that, but it's not the most important one. The other two are kind of more indicative of your ability to pay.
Great. Yes.
So you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
If we were to have 50,000 more people, CDAC would look at that a lot different and say, well, they've got that much more capacity to buy down debt as your population grows. I mean, would it make a substantial difference?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially we're highly rated. AA plus is really good, but again, we were AAA, and the demographics, the aging population, and the smaller workforce is one of the factors. I mean, it would help if they were 50,000, working people. It's going to raise your personal income. It's going to raise the revenues. It's going to lower your debt per capita numbers, and it's going to look, more people paying in to the system and drawing down your pension liabilities and all that. So yeah, it would.
0.5% difference between AAA and where we are.
It's on the last issue that we did, even though we're AA plus, there's not a lot of issuance in Vermont, so it's pretty well. We do pretty well when we sell it. As our rates indicate. When we went out and sold in the last issue, generally this time we did an all competitive issue. Generally, when we do it, it's first time in a long time, we will carve it out and say about a third of the issue we will do negotiated sale. We will work with an underwriter and offer what we call Vermont citizen bonds. So average people can buy even $1,000 increments of bonds, and we'll go out and do that. And then the rest of it will sell competitive. It costs us a little more to do the negotiated piece. We pay a little bit higher rates, but we do that because we're trying to help Vermonters buy it too. But this time because we had just done one in September, we decided to do an all competitive rate. But usually we do it over 2 days, 1 day negotiated, 1 day competitive. So it's a little, but when we did this, there were several other AAA rated states in the market, the day before and the day after. And we actually priced better than a couple of the AAA rated states. I mean, they might have, it's hard to tell because it may have
You don't
been
know what all
next
the other
day.
deals were and all
Right.
that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think Maryland was one of them. They were selling $1 billion, so it's hard to sell $1 billion than 70 million,
Right.
So, but still, we were pricing better than some of the AAA rated states. So, even though we're only AA plus, we're almost
Right.
almost
It's
priced
not a
better than
huge
AAA.
advantage.
Yeah. So,
That's great. It's good to know.
yeah. So this next chart, this dashboard indicator, kind of shows where we are. The bottom piece, the rapidity of debt retirement, this shows by issuing the 20-year bonds with level principal payments, it just shows you how much debt we're paying down in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years, so you can see it's paying down pretty quickly. So that helps. So the next chart shows the history of debt authorizations back to 2000. You can see, starting in 2012 and 13, we went to the biennial recommendation. Before that, it was every year. And again, the high point was 2014-15. The recommendation was 159.9 million. And again, the capital bill is not equal every year, but just for simplicity, we show equal amounts for 2 years. And the 26-27 is in yellow because again, that's the current recommendation, but the legislature hasn't written the capital bill yet, so it's not done yet. So the next chart, slide 20, just shows the amount of debt outstanding. As Mike mentioned, it was about 600, so it's just over 600 million. 23 looks very low only because we issued in September and in June, so they were both within the 24 fiscal year. So even though it was right after the end of 23, we did not issue during that fiscal year. So it looks a little skewed, but you can see sometimes we show a chart. We didn't include it in here, but debt outstanding as adjusted for inflation. And it's actually pretty flat. So even though it looks like we're issuing more debt, if you adjust it to inflation, it's pretty flat number.
22 and 23 were, ARPA years, so there was probably a lot more money flowing in that we didn't have to go out and bond for,
Right.
so that's why that would be down.
Correct. Yeah, the other reason is, and you can see it from the next slide on 21. This shows the amount authorized, and the solid blue is the amount that we issued during the year. But the green, and this is the point, is the amount authorized but unissued. So as we mentioned, it's projects that have been in the capital bill, so it's been authorized to issue, but the money has not been spent yet. So like you said, with the federal money coming in, the projects that received authority, weren't spending that money. We're getting the federal money out the door or whatever. So the amount of authorized but unissued is just very large right now. So
And how does the authorized but not issued impact our rates or our rating? Because it seems like that is to the negative.
yeah, I mean, it's a fairly large number historically, 150. But 150 million is a lot of money. But when you're comparing it to the long-term liabilities of, between the pensions and the debt of, 4.5 billion, it's probably not going to make a big difference,
And then is there a process to go through these and look at them and see if they will still be done, the projects?
Yeah, so house corrections and institutions, I know when they're talking about the capital bill, I think they have a small, subcommittee kind of looking at that, going back. I think any project 2 years or older, they kind of revisit that and say, is this still going to happen or not? And you'll see in the capital bill, near the end of it, they have a section of transfers and reallocations.
Yes.
And so if there are projects that either didn't spend all the money they were authorized or aren't going to happen or whatever, they'll transfer or reallocate that money, and then that's where that section comes.
Great. And this would go back to all of these then.
Correct, right.
There's that process. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are still some that are several years old that, if they're still gonna happen, they'll keep the authorization, I'm sure, but yeah.
Thank you.
So, so the next chart, so this shows the net tax supported debt and the reserve fund commitments for the state. So the top section, net tax supported debt, most of what we issue and anything out of the capital bill, we issue general obligation bonds. And what that means is the debt is payable out of any of the state's money. It's a general obligation. So if we have cash, we have to use that to pay off that debt. And so that's why it's very highly rated, because any of the state's revenues are used to do that debt. The next one, we have the property transfer tax bonds. So back in 2018, we did a housing bond, and we ended up, I think it was about 38 million, the issuance. And the HFA issued the bond, but each year, the first $2.5 million of property transfer tax receipts gets sent to VHFA to cover the debt service on that bond. So even though we didn't issue it, the state did not issue it, it's state tax revenues that are going to pay it. So the rating agencies include that on the state's net tax supported debt.
So quick question, does that count as a revenue bond?
It is a revenue bond,
Okay.
yes. Right, it's the revenue from the property transfer tax. We were thinking by doing this route that it wouldn't end up on the state's net tax supported debt, but
Yeah.
it didn't work, so. And then there are some various leases and technology leases, basically, that also count in the net tax supported debt. So our GO debt is 600 million, but if you add in the other, the rest of our net tax supported debt, we're about 727 million. And the bottom section is the state also has what they call moral obligation on debt. And these entities, mostly the bond bank, VHFA, VITA, and VSAC, can issue debt, in a certain amount that they're limited to do. You can see the maximum per statute. Most of what the bond bank issues is backed by the moral law of the state, and the other agencies have a limit per statute, and you can see what that is. Not everything they issue is under that, but what they do issue, under the, using the moral law is showing as outstanding. And what that says is if the state, if these entities were to default on the debt that is backed by that moral law, the state is not legally obligated to cover that debt, but they're morally obligated. In reality, if the state didn't cover that, it would not be good for either these entities or the state. So it would really hurt the credit rating. So the CDAC kind of looks at that and sets a guideline of about 200 to 225% of the state's net tax supported debt to back by moral obligation. So again, it's probably not going to happen. The way it really works is each of these have a debt service reserve fund, and it's generally set up to be like one time, a year of debt service in advance, just kind of reserved. And if they ever defaulted, that debt service reserve would be used to pay that, and the state would have to replenish that reserve. So it wouldn't be coming up with this whole amount at once, but a little bit every year to replenish that reserve.
So to the question, do these agencies need to get the approval of the state to go out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, when they're going to use this, any bond that they're going to use the moral law of, they have to come to the state treasurer and get approval and governor. So yeah, we'll work with these agencies ahead of time before they can do that. Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So the next slide, we talked about the debt metrics that CDAC has typically reviewed in the past. The rating agencies are now paying more and more attention, and CDAC is now to long-term liabilities. And again, meaning the pension and OPEBs. Which is a much bigger amount than the debt we're looking at. So this chart shows where this is a Moody's ranking of all the states where they are as far as long-term liabilities. And you can see Vermont is ranked, 7, 8, 9, 1 being the state with the highest amount of long-term liabilities. So we're kind of near the top. And what ANLP means, adjusted net pension liability as a percent of personal income. So your net pension liability is your total liabilities for your pension fund minus your assets on hand is your liability. And the reason it's adjusted is, without getting too much into the weeds here. So in the pension funds assume a rate of return on the investments of 7% in Vermont. Every state does things a little different. It could be 7.5% or 6%. So what Moody's does is say, okay, we're going to calculate everyone as if they're using a 6% return, and then so they adjust everybody's liability so they can compare all the states equally. That's why it's called adjusted pension liability. So this just shows, the different metrics compared to the 50 states of all the long-term liabilities. And 24 just shows, again, kind of the same thing. This is among the peer groups where we rank among the AAA rated states. And again, when you're just looking at all the debt metrics, we're third highest among the AAA rated states, which we benchmark to. And on 25, this is an S&P chart that shows your debt as a percent of personal income, kind of the same thing, except this shows, the states ranked, and you can see where Vermont is 738 there. You can see in the green shows the debt, and that's like the net tax supported debt that we're talking about. Is just a very small amount compared to your, your net pension and net OPEB liabilities. So again, 12.7% of, when you add all those up, it's about 12.7% of personal income going to show that. And the next chart, Moody's, same type of thing. And again, this is liability as a percent of revenue, own source revenue. Own source revenue is basically all the state's revenue minus your federal funding. So it's just revenue, basically backing up the federal funds that are coming in. So it's your own personal income taxes and corporate taxes and all that. And again, you can see the debt is pretty low compared to the other long-term liabilities. And this, again, this last chart just shows fixed cost, your fixed cost as a percent of your revenue for each year. And Moody's does this kind of shows your debt service for the year, your pension and OPEB contributions, and other long-term liabilities. About 7.9% of your own source revenue goes to paying fixed costs on your debts and liabilities. So kind of, near the high end of the 50 states, but again, we're getting there. So the last slide, some of the credit priorities: continue funding the full ADEC for the employees and teachers' retirement systems. The last time when we did meet with the rating agencies, they did mention the pension reform is making a difference. If you read the reports, they cite those. It's making progress. We're on the way. The pension in statute, the pensions will be fully funded by 2038 and the OPEBs by 2048. So, when we started in 2008, the pension, changing the statute to fully fund the pension by 2038, we're more than halfway there now. So,
What would keep us from not reaching that goal?
Fully funding it.
Yeah, in those timeframes.
Who
could screw that up?
Well, I mean, a couple things. One of the reasons, 2008, the market, we lost a lot of value in pension funds then. So, a big hit in the market could lower our funding. Certainly not fully funding the ADEC every year. We'll do that. And again, we're 13 years away now from getting there. As you get closer, you can make your ADEC payment, but as the market fluctuates, that ADEC is going to fluctuate. Right. Like right now, it's easy because you're kind of, you've got a long time to calculate what's going to happen. If you're 3 years away and all of a sudden the market tanks, your funding ratio goes down. So that could cause that. But fully funding it, the ADEC, certainly the best way to go as far as, avoiding that problem. So
if we had any extra money, that's probably the place to put it. To buy that down even more, or just let it flow.
Well, back in 22, the $200 million went into it, and that definitely helped.
I got it on sound footing.
Yeah, and we have we could talk about pensions another time, but if you look at the funding ratio, it's definitely getting better. And the extra one-time contribution helped. The ADEC plus payments that we're making right now. So we're paying the ADEC. If everyone knows what the ADEC is, the actuarially determined employer contribution. So every year they calculate how much we should put in to get to the 2038 fully funding. And right now it's in statute. We started 2 years ago at the ADEC plus 9 million. This year's 12 million, I think. And then we go up to 15 million, and it's an extra 15 million into those two plans until we hit 90% funding ratio. So that's helping too. So you know, any money, any extra money going in there, is just gonna get us there faster, so.
It's good.
Cool.
And then reserves, we can talk about reserves.
Oh, yeah, just, you know, maintaining our reserves, I think we're at a pretty good level, you know, the 5% level is good, the rating agencies pay attention to that, I think. You know, I think for AAA, S&P's mentioned like 8% in the past, but, you know, we're at a good level in there, but just maintaining those reserves is a good thing. And again, just to reiterate the recommendation for 26-27 that CDAC is recommending is $100 million. So
Good round number.
good round number. Yeah,
And then in the second year, there could be consideration of
right, right.
doing more.
Yeah, since they went to the biennium, they meet every year and review everything to go, you know, they have not changed that, but they did mention this year that, you know, if things change based on so much uncertainty.
Oh, there's so much.
Yeah, so,
I have one more question about pension funding. Because there aren't as many pensions as there were in the past. And so on the bright side, the folks who are receiving the pensions do have a regular stable source of income. And in Vermont, I suspect that many of our pensioners stay in Vermont, but I don't know. And I'm just wondering if the state gets any sort of maybe even just a small benefit by having more of its older folks have reliable income, as opposed to other states that could have pensioners going other places.
yeah, do you remember, was it about 75%?
It's over 70% across all three systems. The vast majority of pensioners stay in Vermont
Wow.
for retirement. For the record, Ashlyn Doyle with the Treasurer's Office. We can get you those exact numbers. I think the other indirect benefit of reliable income in retirement is that income, the majority of it is gained through investment income over the length of time of the pension plan. And so most of the dollars that we pay out for the pension, we've gotten through the power of compound interest. Whereas if you are supporting folks with support services funded through the state government in their retirement, those are dollar for dollar payments. You're not, you know, getting the opportunity to earn interest on those monies to provide services that people might need if they don't have adequate and reliable income. And so there are a number of indirect benefits of the pension system.
That is very interesting,
And we have
that the revenue is a different type of revenue. Well, and plus letting someone get into poverty, obviously that getting out of poverty is much more difficult than staying
and we have
stable.
over 50,000 active and retired members across all three systems. It's a significant portion of the Vermont population. And you know, not only do those pensions support those individuals, but oftentimes they're supporting a spouse or a family as well. So the effects are amplified.
Interesting. Thank you. And that's probably somewhere on your website. Maybe someday it will be. if it's
Some of
not.
those numbers are on our website, and if you'd like, we can get you the exact percentage of
Yeah,
the number of
yeah.
those that stay here.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. And the big picture is very helpful. Do you? Anybody?
Are we still on a pension system?
Yes, so the three pension systems that, we administer in the Treasurer's Office, Vermont State Employees Retirement System, Vermont State Teachers Retirement System, which, the employer cost for those, comes from the state, but we also do the Vermont Municipal Employees Retirement System, which the state does not contribute to that, but we administer, we do the financials and the investing and all that for it. So, yeah. So those three systems.
Thank you.
And then there's a new project that the treasurer has implemented for folks, for employers who don't pay.
Vermont Saves, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And that's mostly private sector, I believe.
Yes, the Vermont Saves program, it's an IRA program that businesses are mandated to offer their employees, and then employees have the ability to choose whether or not to participate, and they also have flexibility to choose how much they contribute to savings if they choose to participate. That program officially launched just about a month ago now, and we're actually seeing great success, especially among young people, sort of under 30 enrolled, and the average savings rate is over 4%.
Yay.
Yeah, so
That's really good.
especially when you could go, you know, the system allows you to go all the way down to 1%. People are choosing to save over and above
Wow.
the bare minimum requirements. And so it's wonderful. We expect that assets will start to accumulate, you know, they'll accumulate at sort of a exponential rate now that it's up and running.
And it's transferable when you go to another employer, right?
Yeah, if you go to another employer
Vermont.
when you're within Vermont Saves, it's easily transferable, but also you can take your individual retirement account with you wherever you go.
Great. That's another incentive for young people to move here. Okay.
yeah, that's, normally young people unfortunately do not participate in 401ks and things of that nature. So for that to happen is tremendous.
That's great. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
One more comment.
Yes.
In the BAA last year, the legislature charged the treasurer's office with doing an analysis and consultation with JFO and finance and management on budget stabilization reserves and budget sustainability stress testing. We submitted that report to you all in November and it's on your legislative website. So I know we were talking about reserves a little bit. There are some great comparisons across other states in that report and reserve practices in other states.
Okay.
It might be interesting reading if you don't have enough.
Well, it's good to know that there's more out there, of course. And then the first report that you had that you said was on the treasurer's
See that?
website.
Yeah.
Yeah,
see that.
yeah. So if we could get that and get it on our website, I think that would be helpful. It'd be helpful for me.
Just maybe to it. Yeah, definitely.
That would be great. Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Really appreciate
Thank you for being able to explain all of that. It's a lot of complicated stuff that came out easy.
Thank you.
it.
It's fun stuff.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
My numbers geek. With all due respect to that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, and it is 2:35, and is there any other business? I don't see any other business.
Look, 3:00.
Oh, right. Sorry. So let
Oh.
us be adjourned until 3